the network of enlightened women particularly pleases me. That's a wonderful, wonderful title for a group. May you flourish. Let me start. I'm going to address the issue of free speech in the West. These are completely interrelated subjects now, but let me start, as it were, by doing something you might not expect from me, which is to confess my privilege. My privilege is that I'm a writer. And it's possible, by the way, some of you who are students here might want to be writers yourselves someday, or journalists, and if so, please do ask practical questions as well as any other afterwards. I'm very happy to give any advice I can. But as I say, my privilege is that I've been a writer all my life, which I published my first book almost 25 years ago now. And being involved in the business of ideas is a true privilege. Because the more you go through life, the more you realize how few people actually do have the opportunity to not just explore ideas, but to voice them, to follow ideas wherever they lead you, to follow them to their end point. These are much more issues of enormous privilege to me. And I don't take it at all lightly, partly because I know how few people actually do have that opportunity in the workplace, and in some cases on the modern campus. I'm often reminded of the words of one of my great heroes, Alan Bloom, who gave some terrific advice at his commencement speech at Cornell in, I think, 1985. And Alan Bloom, many of you will know, wrote The Closing of the American Mind, was a distinguished scholar, translator of Plato, among other things. Said to the students at Cornell, he said something so beautiful I can never resist the urge to repeat it. He said to the students, he said, "These are your charmed years. They sit between the years of ignorance and the intellectual wasteland that most of us go into in adulthood." He said, "Do not waste these years. They're civilization's best chance to get to you." It's a beautiful sentiment, and I think an entirely true one. Many people find that actually after university, they don't have the opportunity to explore ideas, to read, to debate, to discuss, but that is one of the things that I think that the university is meant to do, meant to encourage. And I very much encourage you to do that tonight. I found in recent years, that, as one of my reviewers, Lionel Shriver, said, I've ended up in this position of being a writer who says things that a lot of other people are saying just before other people have said it, which is a slightly precarious position to be in. But I wrote a book some years ago called The Strange Death of Europe that was alluded to, which addressed the migration issue, which every country in the world has to address in the 21st century. And I could already see from my reporting was very, very badly addressed in every country I knew. Politicians simply had no idea how to actually talk about this very significant challenge in a world of such free movement, free movement of people and ideas and much more. Anyhow, I wrote my book on immigration and amazingly enough survived. And I said to my publisher, he said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, what I really want to do is to write about all of the most taboo things in one book. And it sort of saw him slightly bristle, but I did that with my book, Madness of Crowds. And I was telling a student yesterday that when it came out, I went back to my own university, Oxford, for an event, and my student interviewer said, I'd like to start, Mr. Murray, by just reading out the contents page of your latest book. And sure, and he read about it. I think he did chapter 1, gay, chapter 2, women, chapter 3, race, chapter 4, trans. And I looked out at the audience who all and then I laughed and they all burst out laughing because you could sense a sort of tension in the room in that, you know, we all knew these are really interesting and very important issues and discussions, and we need to be able to think and speak and discuss things more widely than we've perhaps been allowed to do in recent years. Anyhow, all that is a long-winded way of saying that this process led me in recent years to become especially interested in the way in which history has been presented in this country and is being discussed in this country and other countries in the West. It's been my view for some time that there's an oddity that's been going on in our time where, and I'm going to ask for your help in trying to find a definition of this, but an oddity of our time has been the disappearance of what used to be called the public intellectual. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in a second. But if you try to sum it up in your mind, certainly anyone who's older here, what your idea of a public intellectual was, probably have in your head somebody like James Baldwin, William F. Buckley, Gore Vidal, say, Germaine Greer. People who had ideas, held them strongly, and went and contested them in public. In fact, it was almost the definition of what you had to do if you were a public intellectual. You had to go and defend your ideas in public. Some of you may have seen the documentary about Norman Mailer, Town Bloody Hall. Mailer wrote a famous essay on feminism in the 70s, and he was persuaded that he had to debate the major feminists of the day, and he has to. And 4 feminists take him on stage and pummel him around a lot, and it's a pretty amazing sight. It's worth watching. But my point is that Mailer knew you had to defend your ideas. You couldn't just write an essay on feminism and then just leave the stage.
Well, I just love the way that Douglas Murray starts off his speech here at University of North Carolina with basically stating that he wants to go ahead and articulate his privilege at the door, stating it right out there. He's a writer, proud about it. It tells the students, go for it and everything. And everybody has privilege. Everybody has privilege. From the lower rungs all the way up to the top echelon. We all have some type of privilege here. Even the poorest of the poor in this country have privilege over the poorest of the poor from around the world. Even the rich here obviously have some privilege, but there's people that are richer than they are. They've got more. They've got more through either economic means, they've got more through inheritance, and that could be throughout the stratas. It doesn't matter, what nationality, what race, what religion, what color, what ethnicity. You've got privilege. My parents, when we were growing up, probably would have been considered to be upper middle class, but not at the very beginning. My kids are going to have a lot more privilege than I did. My father moved in within the stratas, started off at the bottom in terms of a job. He was a civil engineer, a chief engineer. But when he first started out, you start out at the bottom, you work your way up, move through the different quintiles, so to speak, till you got to the point where very, very, like I said, we were upper middle class for that at that point. I would say the same. So my kids, they've got a tremendous amount of privilege. I've got a lot of privilege. Many of you that are watching here have got privilege. But there's people that have more privilege than we have. And there's certainly a lot more people that have less privilege than we have. But that shouldn't be weaponized against us, which it is, or politicized against us, which it is. That's what it's always done. And the fact that the last part that Douglas was talking about, in terms of the archetype of the, intellectual, like William F. Buckley, for an example, Carl Sagan, let's say, some of these other people that are out there, and, you listen to them. They had to debate their ideas. But today, anybody and anyone can, get a cell phone and go ahead and pseudo-intellectualize themselves or whatever. And some of these intellectuals or so-called intellectuals, they will not debate. They won't come into the arena of ideas. They won't come into the arena to debate their ideas. No, they won't. Because they already have a group that they can play to and that can continue to pat them on the back and say, yeah, you're doing great, you're doing great. They never have to take their ideas out in the public forum and debate them. And that happens so often on the left, so often on the left. I have yet to see someone on the right that will not debate their ideas. They're clamoring to come out on stage. They're just not invited to do so. It's always coming from the left. Anyways, folks, you are watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir. We welcome you here. we're going to get back to more of Douglas Murray and his speech at University of North Carolina. Let's go to it right now.
Has happened in our day, which is that we have developed a type of public figure, at any rate, who throws out claims which they then will not contest or even actually bother defending. And this is, I submit, a part of the serious problem in dialogue and discussion that this country now has. That often highly inflammatory claims about the past, about figures from the past can be made, and nobody has to account for them. Or they say things like, well, I'm not going to debate bigots, or I don't want to give a platform to people, as if it's only them that could give a platform. But it's led to a very strange situation in America. Now, I'm a relatively recent arrival in this country. I moved to New York a couple of years ago, and I moved just in time to see a really, to my mind, quite extraordinary thing. I'd been following the trend of statue toppling, the new iconoclasm, for some years. I was covering the 2020 election for British papers, and among other things, ended up in Portland, where I went undercover with Antifa for a few days, and which was interesting, and was there when they pulled down the statue of Abraham Lincoln, which was an extraordinary thing to do, to my mind. I'm not American, but I knew, well, Lincoln is an important figure. I mean, and then when I got to New York and started living there, almost the first thing that happened when I got found was the council chamber voted to remove the statue of Thomas Jefferson, which has sat in the chamber for, well, since the 1830s. And it was winched down and boxed up and wheeled out the back door. And the New York Post, for whom I write a column, was among the newspapers to notice this and to highlight it. And the Post spoke to one of the members of the council who'd voted for this, and said, well, Thomas Jefferson doesn't represent our values. Which, again, I mean, as an outsider, I thought that's very strange. But if Thomas Jefferson doesn't represent your values, who does? It seems to me to be a very, very important follow-on question. And I do have the suspicion that if the lady in question had been asked that and been honest, she'd have probably said, well, me, obviously. There is a sort of attempt to not only erase the past, but to stand in its place and to say, all these people from the past are found wanting, all of these people from the past are found to have engaged in things we don't like in the present, ergo we are better than the people in the past and we don't need them. There is a list now so long of the figures who've been historically sort of cancelled that I recently started a series called Uncancelled History, you can see online, where I interviewed leading American historians on major figures who have been badly misrepresented in recent years. The one that's been most on my mind this week is Thomas Jefferson. I interviewed the great Jefferson scholar, Jean Yarborough. And it was a terrific session because, of course, she talked about the flaws of Thomas Jefferson, who wants to ignore that, but also the greatness of Jefferson, and also, crucially, the misrepresentation of Jefferson, something I'll come on to. But I submit that a culture which, first of all, allows extraordinary claims to go uncontested, and secondly, is seeing every major figure from the American past pulled down from their plinths, sometimes quite literally, is a culture that's going to be in some serious trouble. Now, I said that I was going to get specific, and let me do so, because I said I want to help to try to find whatever it is that is the opposite of a public intellectual. The person who, as I say, throws out a claim and then doesn't bother to defend it. There are three examples I'll give, three people I'll give as examples, but the first is perhaps my favorite. I discovered while I was speaking yesterday that Robin DiAngelo had spoken at the university last year, and so I was especially interested to know what she said. Robin DiAngelo is the author of a book called White Fragility that was sold by the hundreds of thousands.
You know, Douglas brings up the stories of the statues and how they're being pulled down and how they're being boxed up and crated and taken away. You know, Southern generals, you know, Robert, I mean, all of these people are now being looked at through the lens of 2024, of the 21st century. And we're attributing them the values and the mores and, you know, the ideals that have come about as as we've basically, you know, moved onward. And what they're doing is they're putting these people under the microscopic lens of the values of today. Everybody will say, you talk to any, let's just say, um, a person with morals, a person with humanity, a person with decency, and you ask them, what are your thoughts on slavery? Your first thoughts are going to be that it's absolutely abhorrent, it's despicable, disgusting. It shouldn't be anywhere in the world, but slavery does exist even to this day. In fact, people will say it exists in greater quantities today than it did in the past, because there are countries that still are involved in slavery. They do enslave their people. It's around, folks. Look in the Mideast. Look in Africa. Look around in the Asian countries. In China. It exists. But the fact is that they weaponize. They weaponize the word. And they obviously, now, of course, the founding fathers, Jefferson and others, they were slave owners. And they had but that was nobody at that time thought, or they had their reservations, but nobody at that time articulated basically saying that this was absolutely 100% wrong. This is what people were doing in the Americas. They were doing it in Western democracy. They were doing it in Europe. Now, yes, England stopped it, one of the first nations to stop it. But the fact of the matter is, to go back and say that, these people were bad because of what they were doing at that time, which was part of what was happening around the world, around the globe. And you can say to yourself, didn't they know that it was wrong? You're trying to ask questions. What do you think is going to happen in the future when decades from now, centuries from now, people look back on this era and go, didn't they know what they were doing was wrong? Didn't they know that? Well, with that, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch this portion of this speech by Douglas Murray. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel if you like our content. Like, share, and follow. You all know what to do. Take a look at our video links above and below. My final thought, as always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.